I think, well, the way I staged the book too is if you didn't have any idea who Karen Carpenter was, uh, it would still be a very good story. But I really think that someone, a person can go and do a wiki and research that. Just type in Karen Carpenter, read a little bit about her life and the people that she knew and associated with. She was married one time to a guy, and it was kind of a scam marriage. He too took a big chunk out of her emotionally. In fact, when she was undergoing a divorce with this guy, and she was supposed to go see the lawyer the next day to sign the divorce papers, but she died that morning. So that's just another sad part of her whole existence. But yeah, I encourage those to study Karen Carpenter a little bit. And there are hundreds and thousands of Carpenter fans all over the world. In fact, I was just down to Los Angeles back in September, and there was a 55th reunion I went and attended. And actually, her brother showed up there, Richard. And it was pretty interesting get together. Uh, so all these people, they're down there and they wanted to read this book and all this sort of stuff, but they know all the details of Karen Carpenter in her life, so you don't have to coach them. So I scattered some nuggets around through that book for those people. Like there's something in a room number, there's something in a flight number, there's something in somebody's name. Maybe there's a horse with her dog's name in real life, stuff like that. So it just kind of scattered those around a little bit for the real Carpenter fans. And every once in a while, I'm sure one of them say, "Hey, look at this! Look at it! He did this." Got a little more fun to it.
Everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. I have another great author on the show today, talking about his books. I say books because it's one book, but it's multiple books. We're going to get into that. That's exciting. This is Grinell, but his friends call him Buzz, and we get to call him Buzz because he's a friend of the show now. Buzz, I'm so glad to have you here on Living the Next Chapter. Welcome to the podcast.
Good deal. Thank you, Dave. Appreciate it very much.
Nice to have you here. Can you tell everybody, Buzz, where are you in this big world of ours?
I am located just south of Seattle, Washington, a little town called Auburn. And I actually live on a golf course out here. And every once in a while, I get a golf ball bouncing off my house. Interesting, because I really don't play that much golf. I just collect golf balls.
Do you sell them back to players then? And they can buy their ball back? Okay.
No, one of these days I keep saying that I'm going to get out there and just take those 2 5-gallon buckets and just knock them all over the place.
That would be fun. That would be fun. So, Buzz, you have a very interesting family heritage. You have some really amazing people from your family in the past. Can you tell us about your rich heritage? I would love to start with that right off the bat.
Yeah, I'm a product of 2 reservations in Montana. The Blackfeet Indian Reservation is usually is centered around Browning, Montana. That's where my real father is from. My mother is from the Chippewa Cree Reservation called Rocky Boy. It's about probably 100 miles or so east of Browning, and that's where she hails from. And our stomping grounds kind of ranges in between those 2 reservations historically. And my real dad, interesting story. I never did meet my real dad because of the feud that was going on way back when. Is that my mother and my father weren't supposed to be together, and they did. They ran off and got married, and the families had the marriage annulled and all that stuff. But as a result of that, I became a product of that relationship, and everybody was separated into the warring camps after that, and I consequently never did get to meet my real father, and he died in 1966 in a car crash on the Blackfeet Reservation. But before that, he starred in a movie with Shirley Temple years and years ago, and he was still a young lad, a young teenager, probably even younger than that. And Susanna of the Mounties was an old film back then with some old stars, and he was Little Chief directly across from Shirley Temple. and
Hmm.
that was kind of interesting. And then we are related to Mountain Chief, who is one of my great grandfathers, Blackfeet on the Blackfeet side.
Yeah.
My grandfather on my mother's side was actually he was a marshal on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation, although he was a Cree. And but he was the marshal, and he was a big guy, and he used to go in front of the army forts, like in Fort Benton and that sort of thing, and he would challenge all those soldiers to come out and fight one on one. So they would have unsanctioned boxing matches out in front of the fort. He would just kick everybody's butt, and so that was kind of how he made his. That was his side gig. So eventually, he retired back to Chippewa Creek Reservation, Rocky Boy, and became a reservation judge there. That's kind of how he lived out his years.
Hmm.
That interesting bunch, to say the least.
I love, Buzz, how connected you are with your family history. I think a lot of us these days we don't really understand like how many generations we can go back and we
Yeah.
know the story of our
Mhm, mhm,
families.
mhm.
Where I just admire that you have that knowledge and you have that history.
Mhm.
That's something to be
Yeah.
very proud of.
Well, we've managed to reconnect ourselves over the years, because I'm a product of what they call assimilation, me and my family. My stepdad, and of course, my mother, and I have uh, five brothers and sisters. At that time, there were only three of us, and we were moved out of Montana to California. And woke up one morning, and we were in Chico, California, and that was government's way of saying, "Let's get rid of the Indians. Let's just dump them off into society, give them a few bucks, give them a job, and then we're done with the problem." And but we always invariably wandered back to the reservations or moved to other places. And that process of assimilation didn't work out well, but it served to disconnect us from our families, from our traditional languages and cultures. And we have to make an effort to go back and reconnect that. And for me, that was difficult to do. You get kind of urbanized and pulled away from that, and it caused a lot of problems. But we're still here.
I guess it's really a loss of identity, right? You talk about your
Yeah,
language, you talk about your
yeah,
family,
yeah.
your roots, your
Uh,
story. It's all upended and then replanted somewhere else where you don't feel like you belong.
well, that's the whole idea behind that effort. And my mother was a result of government schools back then, the abusive ones
Yeah.
across Montana, and I come from a long line of alcoholics, and I was one too. And it has that sort of an effect. It's that causes that intergenerational trauma down through the years, and we either pass it back or pass it on, as the saying goes. So,
Yeah.
there's some stuff that goes on there.
We chatted earlier that you have been living sobriety now for many years, and that's part
Mhm.
of your story. How you've
Oh yeah,
gone through that, and now you're on the other side of that. For those that are listening, Buzz, and the idea of living a sober life seems very hard and distant for them in the moment, where maybe they're not able to say they're on that path. What is it like on this side for you now, looking back over all
yeah,
these years,
yeah,
to encourage somebody to maybe this should be the path they should look at?
yeah. In fact, the first of no, this first of this month in November, it's been 40 years. And I did that through what I call the secret anonymous program, because we're not supposed to advertise it all that much, but it is AA, and
Yeah,
I still go to those meetings. In fact, I just went to one this morning. So
nice.
we call it a checkup from the neck up, and guys like me are still in there pitching, and to give it away is to keep it, and so that's the deal. And for natives. There are a lot of traumas going on throughout Indian country, and then we become urbanized and disconnected from culture, and it's just kind of an ongoing thing. Look at it, one of these days it's going to get fixed, but it's kind of I never really ever see the end of that, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're hearing similar stories here in Canada as well too. So it's unfortunately it's something that's much bigger than we hear about on the news. We hear about in history books, and it's not a proud moment, I think, for
Yeah.
our nation.
Well, there's kind of a trap in that too, in that one of the goals for us, those of us in recovery, is to move away from being a victim
Right.
to become responsible for ourselves and our own lives. And
Mm.
the longer we stay, well, the white man abused me and did all this stuff, and I'm just so da 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 da. And it puts us in a tough place, and it's harder to recover from that stuff because it is very real. But at some point, as I indicate to people that I take my sponsors, that I can't fix you, doctors can't fix you, your lawyer, your mother, your dad, no one can fix you until you make a decision that this is what you want to do. You make that decision, and then you take the action to do the things that's gonna work. And it doesn't change itself overnight. It takes us sometimes many years to get to a place where we get from that. What I call is we've got two things going on. We move from being a taker to a giver, and that is a long, arduous journey for a lot of folks. It is not easy. And one day we will wake up and we realize we're more of a giver than we are a taker. And the healing really has setting at that point. And it doesn't happen overnight, like I said, and even 1 or 2 or 3 years sometimes. It's still, it's a struggle. And anybody that goes through that stuff, whether I don't care what color they are, it is
Yeah.
still a hell of a journey.
Yeah. Well, it's inspirational. Buzz, it's great. I love this. You're taking your passions, your stories, and you're now putting them in a book form. You're getting things out, and I like to kind of jump into your book because there's so many things we can talk about in your books. I talked about it in the intro, but tell us about your book, kind of where the idea came from for this book.
Mm.
There's a musical connection
Yeah.
for the main character, but can you kind of give us an idea, like where did the big concept, the big idea for the book come from?
So the book is wink, wink, nod, nod about Karen Carpenter. That's the genesis of the whole thing. And her and I would have been the same age. And when they first came out, I was in the military. I'd been drafted, and uh, they started had their first song came out, and it was actually my first crush on a musical female. It was Karen
Okay.
Carpenter, and uh, because I went through the military, got sidetracked with a lot of alcohol and drug abuse and all that sort of stuff. I kind of lost track of what happened to her. And I happened to be browsing on YouTube one day, just about the time the pandemic kicked off. And I was at home just kind of kicking back a little bit just to let the dust settle. And I saw a video of this of Karen Carpenter. And I was reminded of her beautiful voice and all that sort of thing. So I started digging around a little bit. What was it? And I remembered something bad happened, and this had to do with not eating or something.
Mm.
And of course, I discovered all that. And she died young at the age of 32 from anorexia nervosa. And when Karen Carpenter died, everybody, the world kind of stopped and said, "Whoa, what's that?" Because no one had ever heard of that before.
Yeah.
So I pulled the thread on that. And as I got into her story, her personal story, it just was like, for me, it was just hit me really hard. And I don't know why that is. I mean, why would a guy who is involved in heavy construction all his life, was worked on the railroad, beating spikes, worked in the timber industry, cutting big trees down, a manly man. And here I am sitting at a YouTube thing, and I had tears in my eyes, thinking, "What the hell happened here?"
Mm.
So it just lit the fuse on that. As I got into it and studied it, I discovered that Jesus, here's this poor gal kind of taken apart by the music industry. Her and her brother and her family got involved, and all of that stuff that still happens today with artists that are very young who have this just enormous overnight sensational fame, and they just can't deal with it. And then they've got these opportunists who just drag them all around the country, make them tour and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, that just that just lit the whole fuse for me, I had to do something with it, and I didn't know what to do. So I just thought, well, I was reading someplace where wouldn't it be great? Someone said that if Karen Carpenter were still alive, how could we have saved Karen Carpenter from her ultimate fate? And so I started me thinking, and that's one of my problems is sometimes I think. And it just emotionally grabbed me. And as I described to you before, it's like Close Encounters of the Third Kind when the guy went nutso and was throwing mud into his house to build this thing and he didn't know what it was. This was kind of like that because my wife looks in and she says, "Are you okay?" And then I was going to work and I started writing this thing. I didn't know where it was going. I had no intention of writing. I'm not a writer. I wasn't a writer at all.
Yeah.
And so I just started putting this thing together and didn't know where it was going. And I closed my door at work and I know people were out there going, "Is he okay? What's wrong with him? What is he okay?" And as I indicated to you before, it's an amazing thing because this thing has like almost 400 pages. And that original rough manuscript was roughly completed in about 3.5 to 4 months.
Wow.
And then it went to editing, and then editing takes a year and a half, back and forth to rewrites and all that sort of thing. And as I wrote this thing, it just, it's a process that I dug around. It's a self-published event. And I had to find a publisher. And of course, the world of publishing is so swarmy and ugly. Well, even if you've got the big four publishing for you, it's still a little bit rough because it's hard for an author to make money through the big four. And to publish something independently is also a challenge. There's so many people out there looking to take a bite out of you or pick your pocket. And it's hard you have to discern the winners from the losers and the scammers from the not scammers. So I got a hold of a guy here in Seattle. His name is Elliot Wolf, and he's a publisher out of the Seattle area. And so I called this guy, and my thinking was, well, if I can get somebody close to home, and it doesn't work out, and he tries to scam me, I can go find him and kick his ass. But
Stand out there and call him out and say, "Come on, let's have a fight."
But as a result of our collaboration, we've become very good friends, and I think the real Elliot.
Yes.
And so that kind of worked out, and he told me what I had to go through and do to do this and what the cost may be and all that stuff. And he didn't pull any punches. And so I knew the guy was pretty right on the mark. And so he helped me through this thing, him and the editor. And so that was kind of how this thing kind of got off and running. Amazing stuff.
So one thing you mentioned as well when we were chatting is the way you approached how you wrote the book was interesting as well. Like if I, in my limited knowledge, Buzz, about how to write a book, I would think you'd start at the beginning and you'd write the middle and then you'd write the end. Now you have done several different things in your book and in your journey as an author. You told me that you started more in the middle. Can you explain why you started in the middle?
Yeah.
Like, that seems odd to me.
Yeah, well, it probably is very odd, having never done this before, and given it some thought. And there are two main characters, and there's an Indian kid, a native kid from Montana, from Browning, and he's living on a little ranch outside of Browning. That's where he was born and raised at. And then the Karen Carpenter, I didn't use her real name; it's a different character name, same initials though. And they're in Southern California. And what I wanted to see is these two people meeting for the very first time, him going through a traumatic experience of war and captivity, and her coming from the other end of this thing called anorexia and the pressures of the music industry and the torture and the self-torture that was going through. I had all this emotional stuff going on with her. And of course, him by nature coming out of captivity, out of Vietnam for 3 years, you got two damaged people here. And I wanted to set the stage emotionally about the center of the book, or about the end of the 1/3 of the way through the book, their first meeting and what that'll look like. And I wanted to get a picture of what that would feel like for both of those protagonists, and how they would process it and what that would feel like when they met. And so that was my thinking. And so then I wrote from that part, from the out to the front, or from the front to that part, and then from there out to the end. Uh, with that is kind of the centerpiece of the whole thing. And just kind of went from there. And obviously it became something. It was interesting because I didn't know what I was doing. It's like driving really fast with your headlights off. And I didn't know where this was going. I shelled out some money for a publisher and for editing and all that sort of thing. And I wrote this thing in chunks, and I delivered it to them as I was reading it. And then I delivered the final manuscript as it was all complete, shipped it over to them, and then waited. And then went on about my business. And this thing just was really on my mind all the time. It had just kind of taken over my life. During the writing of this thing, I would walk out into the kitchen here at night just to get a drink of water or something. I would just break down. It was just like, Jesus Christ. So it became so emotionally attached to it. I don't know why that is. It's what I think it was a very spiritual event for me. And if you're in a 12-step program, we always talk about a spiritual program, not a religious program, a spiritual program. And with me, where I am after 40 years of living life in recovery, my spiritual program can consist of reincarnation, astrology, all of these other things that make up this thing, quantum physics. All of those things kind of come together to create this spiritual experience for me. And I think, mature enough to handle that stuff and pull the pieces together. And there's this gal that said, well, obviously, Karen Carpenter was channeling you. And the hair stood up on the back of my neck, and I thought, does that stuff really happen? And I actually made a trip down to Thousand Oaks, California, where Richard Carpenter lives. And he had his sister and his two parents are interred at that cemetery there in Thousand Oaks. I went down there and paid a visit to that where she was interred. See, this is how far I went with this. And I took some sage and some sweetgrass with me and did a little bit of, blessing around that area. Then I came back and I called my psychiatrist and had a conversation with her. Like, I was telling her what was going on. And I said, is it possible to fall in love with a dead person? She said, there's nobody getting hurt, are they? And I said, well, I don't think so. Me a little bit. She said, oh, well, you'll be fine.
So Buzz, do you think, Buzz, you were chosen to write this book? Do you think it was like you got a tap on the shoulder and it was like, you're the one to do this?
We, in our spiritual lives, at some point, I think when we progress to a certain place, there's this thing called the dark night of the soul. And you are elevated in your spiritual experience. And it's like you really almost like don't have a choice. It comes and gets you.
Yeah.
And some of us are a little dim-witted, we don't catch on right away. It's like what I call the Jethro Gibbs head slap, alongside the head.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I was slapped in the head a couple of times, and I finally thought, Jesus, criminy, okay. And then it becomes some of these become like a real emotional experience. It boots you spiritually upstairs. And then the whole entire way that I looked at my life since then has changed. I mean, the work I do, I view it differently. I think I've raised my vibration immensely. It wasn't the intent of this, and I didn't even know about vibrations and frequencies. And then I had to double back and kind of started checking that out because these people start talking about this stuff. So very interesting stuff, and being so emotionally connected to this thing and getting it out the door. In fact, during that period after writing the manuscript, delivering it to the editor, and then waiting, you're thinking like you're chewing your fingernails off, going, "Oh, Jesus Christ, these things." And I'm telling myself, I don't really care. I just wrote it for myself, blah, 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 blah. And if somebody else doesn't like it, if they think it stinks, what the heck? I'll just shelve it and go on with life, whatever. I won't publish it. So Elliot calls me, the publisher, and he says, and because he's a little bit, he's kind of taken this whole thing and like, I could tell as soon as he hangs up his phone, he's kind of smirking, going, "Oh, Jesus, this guy thinks he got it right." So he calls me up and he says, "Buzz, I don't ordinarily make calls like this." And I thought, oh.
Oh,
He
no.
said,
Yeah.
he said, "Danielle, the editor called me up and she was in tears." And I thought, well, what happened to her? And she said, "She needs more time. This is something she really wants to work on. She wants to go through it some more and make sure that she wants to refine this product because she's very interested in it." And that's kind of where he left it, which meant to say that you guys like you are strange. Guys like you don't show up every day on somebody's doorstep, having never done this before.
Right.
So it's like, oh, okay. And so it's just that weird. I mean, strange thing. Very emotional deal. Yeah, it took something out of me, but it also gave me something on the other end. And I have to be careful with it because when I start talking about some of this woo stuff to guys who are newcomer in a spiritual program, I don't want to scare them or run them off or make them think that, boy, you guys that do this stuff are just weirdos. I don't want nothing to do with you. I couldn't say I'd blame them. So I have to be careful. I sponsor guys all the time, and the ones that I know can kind of handle this, we have conversations about this. And something to the effect, including me, I always tell them, we came here because I do believe in reincarnation. It's not even a belief, it's just a knowing. When I started digging into that a little bit, it was like, God, this is a thing. This is it. I just know it. And the odd thing about me coming together with reincarnation is this is kind of an odd story. In Canada, uh, there's a place out, probably west of you quite a ways, Alberta or somewhere in there. I can't remember exactly where. There's a tribe called the Alkali Lake Band. And in the early 70s, that tribe had 100% alcoholism. They were all alcoholic, including the leader of that band, Andy Chelsea, and his wife and family. They were all alcoholic. And in fact, there's a video of that was put out years and years ago. It's really grainy now because it's so old. It's called "For the Honor of All," about this tribe who achieved 100% sobriety through the secret anonymous program.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd started a native project, which was a labor of love between myself and some other recovering alcoholics for the native youth around the Spokane area because they didn't have anything. There was no cultural way to treat these kids that have been urbanized but were still connected to the reservations, a modality of treatment that was effective for them. Because if you stuck them in the white world, the treatment, they just didn't get it and they ran away.
Right.
So as a result of being connected to this organization, I got a hold of Andy Chelsea and I said, would he be willing to come down and speak to our people about, this miracle that took place with the Alkali Lake Band? He said, sure, I'll come down and talk. So he flew into Spokane. I went and picked him up. We stopped and ate lunch, and as we were walking into the restaurant, he reaches in his back pocket and he pulls out this little book, starts waving it around. Reincarnation. I thought, oh no, I'm stuck with some kind of a nut. He says, "This is it, Buzz. This is it." And he was waving that little book, and I'm going, "Oh my God!" Inwardly rolling my eyes. But it was a pretty good event, and the kids loved it, and he did a hell of a job. And then all these years later, this whole thing comes full circle and whacks me alongside the head.
Mm.
And I thought, yeah, that's one of those things way back when somebody's trying to get my attention. My antenna wasn't up high enough or something. And to me, that's the real thing. Now, most folks, they're happy with being Catholics or Protestants or Methodists, and that's fine. There's
Yeah,
nothing
yeah,
wrong with
yeah,
absolutely nothing wrong with that. Nothing.
yeah,
It's a belief system, and folks, it sustains them and makes them thrive, has them thrive, and all that stuff. Ain't nothing wrong with that. I just for me.
yeah,
And if you had to ask me today what, if any sort of religion I was, I'd say I'm not one. But if you must push me, I'd probably more close to being a Buddhist than anything. But I
mm,
don't go to temples or any of that stuff. You don't
yeah,
have to.
yeah,
So anyway, that's interesting how that all came around and came back to present itself in my life, and then this book kind of has that in there. This book is about me. See, I never realized that. The publisher comes back around and he says, "Well, you're all over that book, Buzz. You're just all over that thing." And I said, "Where?" He said, it's all you. You just don't see it." And I guess it's true. We have a tendency to write about ourselves, and we put ourselves in bits and pieces of things that we create. And I think what most art is that way. It has to be that way. A Van Gogh. I mean, there's Van Gogh in that Van Gogh. And so when we write, it presents itself like that. And the other things that I tell people that I sponsor is, and if they're having a little bit of trouble and we get to a place where we'll talk about character defects and all this stuff that goes on, and all these are bad things, and maybe they're just not bad things. Maybe they're just features that we came here, I believe, in this latest iteration of ourselves when we're born. These built-in features come from the factory. They're brand new features. And
mm,
then we get into then life starts to intervene and rough up these features, and sometimes they get cut off at the pass, and they don't even we're not even able to present these inner talents or these things that are really us. And so we start drinking alcoholically and using drugs. Those things become even further away. So then when we start into recovery, we start clearing the driftwood away and doing the things that we need to do in order to merge ourselves into life, real life. These things start presenting themselves in ways, and some people just don't know what the heck those are, or they know that there's something that they should be doing, but they're not quite too sure what it is, but they know it nags at you. It's like this writing thing. It's like, well, I'm not a writer. I'm just not any of the. Yeah, you kind of are, because that stuff got buried. Now it's presenting itself and it's demanding to be fed. It makes its demands. And that's why some people, they go through a recovery process and they become great artists in ways. I mean, they write music, write poetry, write books, become great actors and actresses. I mean,
yeah,
this is kind of how this stuff pops out.
yeah,
And so it's not a character defect. It's something that's there that you should maybe take a look at, and know that you should need to polish that up a little bit and take a look at it. At least do that.
yeah.
So I think that's kind of interesting to know.
So for somebody reading Saving KC, Buzz, first time reader, they're going to open this up, they're going to read it. How much knowledge about Karen Carpenter's story would benefit them? Does it benefit them at all? Is
I
it
think,
totally separate? What do you think?
well, the way I staged the book too is, if you didn't have any idea who Karen Carpenter was, uh, it would still be a very good story.
Okay.
But I really think that someone, a person can go and do a wiki and research that. Just type in Karen Carpenter, read a little bit about her life and the people that she knew and associated with. She was married one time to a guy, and it was kind of a scam marriage. He too took a big chunk out of her
Hmm.
emotionally.
Yeah.
In fact, when she undergoing a divorce with this guy, and she was supposed to go see the lawyer the next day to sign the divorce papers, but she died that morning.
Hmm.
So just another sad part of her whole existence. But yeah, I encourage those to study Karen Carpenter a little bit. And there are hundreds and thousands of Carpenter fans all over the world. In fact, I was just
Right.
down to Los Angeles back in September, and there was a 55th reunion I went and attended. And actually, her brother showed up there, Richard.
Wow.
And it was pretty interesting get together. Um, uh, so all these people, they're down there and they wanted to read this book and all this sort of stuff. But they know all the details of Karen Carpenter in her life, so you don't have to coach them. So I scattered some nuggets around through that book for those people. Like there's something in a room number, there's something in a flight number, there's something in somebody's
Mm-hmm.
name.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's a horse with her dog's name in real
Mm,
life,
okay.
stuff like that.
See.
So it just kind of scattered those around a little bit for the real Carpenter fans. And every once in a while, I'm sure one of them will say, "Hey, look at this! Look at it! He did this." Got a little more fun to it.
If
So
you had the chance to sit down with Karen Buzz and ask Karen something that you might not know fully, like the answer to or the thoughts behind it, and you had a chance to sit
um,
down with her, what kind of question would you give to Karen if she was able to walk in, sit down with you there?
but if I met you in 1973, would you marry me?
There you go.
No, really. It would be way too personal. I would want to ask what her feelings were,
Hmm.
all kind of along the way for everybody around her, and that would be very personal.
Yeah.
I know, but for me, that'd be like the most curious thing in the world. Randy Schmidt wrote a book, what I consider probably the best book on Karen Carpenter that there is, called Little Girl Blue. And it's chronologically, and he backs it up with with the dates and all that sort of stuff. And annotated, I guess you call it.
Yeah.
He did an excellent job in that. And I ran across him down at the Carpenters reunion. We had quite a chat.
Good.
And I gave him a copy of the book. And I hadn't heard back from him, so maybe he didn't like it. I don't know. But the other thing that was the goal in this thing is not to throw rocks at anybody, because
Nope.
some people blame the mother and the brother and and on and on and on. I didn't want this to be that.
Hmm.
And uh, I don't think it is. I think I treated everybody with respect in this whole thing. In case Richard ever picks it up and decides to read it, you won't come after me too badly. I don't
Right.
think. And if a person looks at the cover of the book, it's got two gloved hands catching a license plate falling from the sky, and
Hmm.
it's a California plate initialed with KAC1. That's the license plate on the last car that she owned. She had a little Mercedes coupe that she drove, and that's the last license plate on that car. And in
Nice.
fact, Richard still has that car in Thousand Oaks in one of his. He's quite the car collector, so he has that original car still parked in his repertoire up there. So
Wow. So, Buzz, like you talked earlier about your struggles, your story, your path, your addiction. What parallel do you see between your journey and what Karen lived through?
mm,
Because she was also struggling
yeah.
in form. She had
Mm.
this thing that she was trying to work through, and she thought she was doing what she could to work through her what was happening in her life at that time. Do you see any parallels between your story and hers at all?
It was very interesting. In fact, again, if the male protagonist is an echo of me,
Okay.
you know, we both suffer from drug and alcohol addiction,
Hmm.
particularly alcohol. And the interesting thing about that, of course, is that alcoholism cannot be cured. We can put it in remission, and we treat it that way. It's like the old deal is once you're a pickle, you can never be a cucumber again.
I
And
like that, Buzz. I like that.
somewhere it said that somewhere along our active addiction process early on, we cross a line. And, the bells don't go off, the whistles and any of that kind of stuff. We just cross a line and we don't know it. And some of the stuff that I read, it's like we somewhere at that time, we generally place ourselves beyond human aid. And that's borne out later on with alcoholism. The realization is that, again, no one can fix you, not your mother, your father, the priest, the doctor, the psychiatrist. Nobody can fix you. And the only one that can really address what's going on with you is somebody else that's gone through it or is going through it. And that spiritual tie there, and that acknowledgement that there has to be a spiritual remedy involved in that, which is what that becomes. So if we switched over to anorexia, at that time in the 70s or early 80s, or late 70s, early 80s, there was one person that really had known what anorexia nervosa was, and it was a German immigrant that immigrated to the United States, Hildy Bush. And I dance around with her name a little bit in the book. Uh, and she she wrote a book called The Golden Cage, which alludes to metaphorically to anorexia. And she knew what it was, identified it, identified the symptoms and the how it's created, the effect, and it's usually kicked off by it has a real detailed relationship between it's usually young women, and there's a deal with their mothers, and there's something that doesn't get filled out with their mothers. Now, Karen's mother uh, was a very traditional, uh, you know, Anglo-Saxon, Lutheran, whatever Methodist type of thing. She was
Yeah. Yeah.
very into that thing, and that's how she ran her world. And her kids were pretty much, she ruled the roost
Yeah.
and controlled everybody. And Richard was the center of attention. They moved from Connecticut, New Haven, to California because the dad moved there for employment purposes. But he also wanted to be in warm weather and get away from Connecticut.
Hmm.
And they moved there too, so they could develop Richard's talent because he was a wonderful piano player and kind of has started composing at a young age and all that stuff. No one gave this little sister a second thought. And then as he started in his career, she was a tag along. And then at one point in time, she opened her mouth and sang. And
Hmm.
this thing came out. And it's like, what? So it kind of went from there. But in that process of that, the mother did not let go of the fact that Richard was the whole deal, and it wasn't
Hmm.
Karen.
Yeah.
And that really damaged her, I think. And she wound up going to a guy in New York that had a different modality. See, this Hilty Brush had the modality to treat the stuff. She identified what it was and what had to happen in order for this person to respond to treatment. And part of that was, I can do this as a psychiatrist. I can set the stage. I can help with this, 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 and this. But there's a piece to this I can't touch.
Hmm.
And they get these young ladies get themselves in a way where this thing cannot be cured. It's like, it's there. You can treat it. You can put it into remission. But that's as far as we can get. And that person needs to, you know, stay on top of that thing and treat it for the most of the rest of their days. It's
Yeah.
just like alcoholism; it doesn't go away.
Yeah.
And the, just like me, after 40 years, I still go after it. I still do what I need to do in order to keep myself centered.
Yeah.
Because I've seen people at 20, 25 years go out and think they can sneak a drink. Man, they're off on a run, and sometimes it kills them flat out. And other
Yeah.
times, they're just never the same. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's very deadly, and so is anorexia when it gets to that point, and
Yeah.
you can't reel that personality back. And so those are the tie-ins. And so you got this
Yeah.
guy who's got this thing, she's got this thing from the other end, and so there's kind of a common denominator in terms of what is able to fix that. Uh, the doctors and psychiatrists and all that stuff chime in, but there's still that emotional piece missing.
Yeah.
And I think that most readers will like the way that it's handled. It's a little woo-woo, the kind of the stuff I've been
Yeah.
talking,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
because the spiritual fix in some of this stuff is it gets very interesting for those of us that have been around in Alcoholics Anonymous for a number of years have discovered that, boy, I tell you what, there's no fooling how some of this comes about and is able to help us get through our recovery and just keep building and growing the spiritual program.
Mm.
So, and that's kind of the tie-in. So I discovered
Yeah.
that, and I read a lot of books on anorexia nervosa. What 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 is the genesis of that? What starts it? What keeps it going? What makes it worse? And at the same time, she picked up a little bit of weight, and she kind of had a body figure that people would really appreciate today. But back then, if you recall, if you're that
Mm-hmm.
old,
Right. Yeah.
was
Yeah.
Twiggy was in the mix,
Yeah. Yeah.
and she was the gal from Britain that weighed about 100 pounds, and she was really skinny, and that was the thing.
Yeah.
And so when Karen was performing, all it took was one guy to say, "Write down, well, she's Richard's chunky sister," or something like that. And, oh
Yeah.
boy, and
Yeah.
and then that caused the thing, and so that there was a lot of stuff going on there. There's a lot there to fix, and in real life, it just didn't happen. The guy who was treating her out of New York was on just kind of a different treatment modality that was just kind of foul ball. And in the end, it didn't help her one bit. But he thought it did. But uh, she gets up one morning, makes coffee, goes up to her room and collapses. So, those kinds of things like that are very sad.
Yeah.
And what I do, you know, we have successes in the Secret Anonymous program, but we also have tremendous failures. And when the tremendous failures hit, they're not just failures, they are deaths.
Mm-hmm.
So in my time, I've experienced a lot of that, and some of it hits me harder than others, really, really does. And anyway, if that makes any sense to anyone, hopefully I tie this thing together where it makes a good story, and folks that have read it, they really enjoy it. Um, it takes them back. A lot of folks, my age, read this thing and they identify with it greatly. I mean, it had to be placed in the 70s, because the story doesn't flow if you've got cell phones.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
So it's just an interesting time. Um, yeah, the numerous republishings that went on with the book. When I wrote the original ending manuscript, and let's say it has more of a happy ending than anything. And I thought about it when I was writing that ending, and I thought, this is not the way this is supposed to end. I mean, really, I felt that just for me, it was not a satisfying ending. But I made the decision. This is what the reader wants. So I ended it the way I thought a reader would want it to end. And so that was published that way. And once I got the book, became a real thing. Gosh, I wrote a book. Here it is. Here's the
Mm-hmm.
proof. But it bothered me, and it bothered me like, oh my God. So I got a hold of the publisher. I said, got the wrong ending. What do I do? What do we do with this? He said, well, why don't you publish a book that's got two endings? And I said, nobody does that. And he said, exactly. So this is, as this thing came out, there was a little bit of a mix up. and a second book was published, and it has the alternate ending, not the original ending. It only has the alternate ending.
Wow.
And so then the publicist, not the publisher, the publicist freaked out. I've been selling it as this. What'd you do? You blew it up.
Yeah.
So third time's the charm. So we got a book. We're going to have a hard copy, soft copy book out there with both endings. And
Wow.
if a person really wants to know what both endings are, you can obtain the book on Audible, Saving KC, and that copy has both endings.
Oh.
And so a person can get that and listen to both of them at once. And if you so choose to get the hard copy, that would be great. And there you can get the original version, or you can get the alternate ending version, which doesn't end as well as the original does.
Mm-hmm.
Or in after January, you can get the softbound copy that has both endings in it. So,
Wow. You know, growing up, Buzz, I used to love these books. They were like called Choose Your Own Adventure.
yeah,
And you could get to the end of the chapter or the end of the book and you could choose. I want to go left through the door. I want to go right through that window. Right. You could choose which one, and then your endings were different. So I kind of like the idea of that. And the fact that now you're going to have both in one book.
yeah,
So technically you could buy 3 different copies of the same book and enjoy them all, right?
And there is an Amazon version of the ebook of them too as well. But I think, if I remember, I think that has both endings in it as well.
Wow. See,
So
that's amazing.
it's like I went into the saloon with a shotgun and shot the thing all over the place, in order to try to hit something.
Yeah.
So
Well, I'm excited, Buzz. This is exciting to hear about the book. As a music lover, I love the connection with Karen Carpenter. I love how you take your own personal story of struggling in silence, where not everybody knows what you're dealing with. And I know for some people that I know in my life that have battled with alcoholism, they don't like put it on display in front of people. That's something that they're wrestling with when nobody sees them, right? Behind the scenes. Karen Carpenter struggling behind the scenes in silence without being all out there explaining what's happening with her, right? So there's a lot of parallels there. And I just think, kind of, Buzz, as we're wrapping up, there's somebody listening to this, and either it's them or it's somebody they know of who is struggling in silence. And they just don't know how to reach them, how to support them, how to be there for them as a family member, a partner, a husband, a child, right? You want to be there to help these people.
Yeah.
Any words that we can leave people with today, Buzz, around struggling in silence and how we can be an ally to that person?
Yeah, and as we get further into our addictive nature with this stuff, we tend to isolate more and more. And that's why I usually find people like me in some crappy motel room, passed away, because we're isolated. We don't want anybody to know what's going on. And so this thing just takes its toll. The other part of this, too, for family is that the deal is, we've discovered, is family can't fix family. It's just not, it doesn't work. It's been said, they push your buttons. These addicts and drunks push your buttons because they installed them and they know where they're at. And so it's a tough deal to do that. It takes a stranger to become involved with this so that that familiar tie is cut and this person can deal in very blunt terms about how things are or aren't. So that's kind of the deal. And how many mothers have I talked to and fathers? They just want to do something. Anorexia is the same way. There's, what do we do? Well, can't you just eat?
Yeah.
No?
Right.
What's the problem? Or can't you just stop drinking that stuff? What's the problem?
Exactly.
See, and that they're so common in that, like both ends of the spectrum, but the treatment for both is pretty much the same. And there is a spiritual element involved in that. And a lot of folks, two families don't like to admit that there's something wrong. And Karen Carpenter's family was the same way. What we can't tell anybody what's going on here. This is, it'll ruin the career, all this other stuff. So the secrets are kept, and the wars. This person's just getting worse. So that's what happens to us. That's kind of the family dynamic, and it's unfortunate and sad to watch. We help where we can to educate. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But when it does work, you wind up with a two-legged miracle, and that is something to see. People just open up. I mean, just like a flower opening up. And these personalities change overnight, and they become something no one ever knew before. And that's wonderful to watch. And we learn how to integrate ourselves into society, and with our family, we actually learn how to love ourselves for the very, very first time. Because as this thing progresses, we're just damaged, and we hate ourselves for it. And then the family hates us too because of the things we do or don't do. And so, yeah, it's very complicated and complex. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, it's good. Buzz, for people who want to reach out to you, they want to talk to you about your book, they want to talk to you about your story, your journey, where are we sending people so they can connect with you, Buzz?
I have a place for blog on the website. The website is savingkc.com.
Okay.
savingkcthestory.com.
Okay.
Saving initial K, initial C, thestory.com. And there's all about me there. There's all about what's coming up. Again, they can purchase the ebook on Amazon. That's available. The hard copies are not available there yet. And a person can go to Audible and get the book there, or get the Audible copy. And if you do listen to the product or read it, please be kind enough to leave a positive review or whatever kind of review.
Yeah. Excellent. That's good. That's one thing I try to encourage everybody, Buzz, is to leave a very detailed review. Tell people why you loved it. Yeah. Because then someone else is going to read your words as a reviewer and go, oh, I didn't know that I'd love this book as much as I wanted to know. So it's great to have that kind of feedback from your readers. So I encourage everybody to do that.
Yeah, outstanding. That's as writers, I've learned that, boy, we really appreciate that stuff. That's kind of the fuel in our gas tank to write the next one.
Good. Excellent. Buzz, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for making time. Thank you for accepting the little tap on the shoulder to write this book. For a non-writer to write something as you've done in the unique way that you've done it, with the results that you're seeing, and a story that needs to be told, and a story that you're living every day, right? It's so great to have this book in the world, and to have you to be the author of it, the perfect person to write this book, Buzz.
Well, Dave, thank you very much for having me on your cast, and certainly appreciate it. And I look forward to maybe meeting up with you again. Maybe there's a second book coming out here soon.
Oh, you can come back anytime, Buzz. I'd love to have you back. Everybody, all the information for Buzz in the show notes. As always, I would love for you to go get a copy of the books. I love audiobooks, so I'm going to be listening to the audiobook. Share it with somebody, too. If you know somebody in your life that this book can help, maybe it's just the encouragement they need to hear and see and read the story that Buzz is sharing, and maybe share this episode as well. Let them hear Buzz's words. I think that's really going to help them in their journey. Buzz, again, thank you so much for being part of the podcast.
You are welcome, Dave, and again, thank you.
Hey, thanks for listening to Living the Next Chapter. I'm glad you stayed all the way to the end. You're my new bestie. And the one thing I like to do with my besties is enjoy time together over a cup of coffee. Now, one thing missing in the equation is my coffee cup is empty. And what I would love if, after 390 plus episodes roughly, if you found any value in the podcast and you want to say, hey, Dave, do you need a refill of your coffee cup? I'm looking at it right now, and you know what? It's looking kind of sad. There's not much in the coffee cup. If you want to help support the podcast, I would love you forever as besties and celebrate coffee with you. You can celebrate and support the show at our website using our Buy Me a Coffee link. And all the money goes back into the podcast. And we also like to give it to other podcasters. So if you want to support the show, head over to livingthenextchapter.com and let's top it up. Thank you guys. Thanks for listening. Cheers.